Everyone in Rust Creek believed the little girl would never walk again. Her mother believed it. The doctor signed papers that said it was impossible. But Shadow, an old war dog with scars under his black fur, knew something was wrong the first time he brushed his cold nose against the girl's bare toes, and her foot flinched. Paralyzed legs didn't pull away from the cold. The truth Mason Cole would uncover in that dying West Virginia town would not be a miracle. It would be a crime. One built on broken bodies, forged charts, and quiet children drugged into silence. And it would all start with a cup of hot chocolate and a veteran who couldn't stop seeing battlefields, even in a roadside cafe. The morning fog in Rust Creek sat low and heavy over the abandoned rail yard, like battlefield smoke that had forgotten there was no war here. The old steel mill loomed over the town, its rusted skeleton a reminder of better days. Its dead conveyor belts stretched out like broken limbs along the hillside. Mason Cole rode in under that gray, expectant sky on a matte black pickup that had seen more deserts than rain. The truck's bed was packed with everything he owned that wasn't nailed down. And in the passenger seat sat Shadow, a 95-pound black German shepherd whose golden eyes missed nothing. They looked like trouble just passing through. Mason killed the engine outside the only place that looked open on Main Street, a squat brick building with fogged windows and a flickering sign that used to read Millside Cafe before half the neon burned out. Now it just sighed Il Cafe in sickly blue. "Stay," Mason murmured. Shadow hopped down first, landing with the silent control of something that had once been trained to go through doors where guns waited on the other side. His body was relaxed, tail low, but his eyes did a slow, methodical sweep. Alleys, parked cars, pedestrians. He cataloged every sound, every movement, old habits, old wars. The bell above the cafe door jangled as Mason pushed inside, bringing a breath of cold air with him. Rust Creek's chill gave way to the warmth of coffee, frying bacon, and the faint metallic tang of thick well water. Ceiling fans turned lazily overhead, their blades collecting dust and dead flies. A few regulars sat hunched at the counter, men whose hands were stained with oil and whose eyes had the hollow look of people who'd watched their livelihoods packed into trucks and shipped somewhere cheaper. Mason chose a booth in the back, as far from the front windows as possible, back to the wall, sightline to doors, kitchen, windows, and bathroom corridor. His brain mapped the room automatically: cover, exit routes, potential threats. Shadow slid beneath the table without being told, positioning himself so his body blocked Mason's legs from view, but he could still see the entire cafe through the gap between bench and floor. A woman approached, writing pad in one hand, coffee pot in the other. She was somewhere in her mid-30s, but everything about her said she'd had to work much harder than that number deserved. Auburn hair twisted into a loose knot. Faded blue polo with the cafe logo almost peeled away. Dark circles under her eyes that even makeup hadn't bothered to fight that morning. "Morning," she said, voice carrying the soft Appalachian music of Rust Creek. "You're either lost or brave, honey. We don't get many new faces unless they miss the exit." "Coffee," Mason replied. "Black, whatever's hot." Her tired mouth quirked into the ghost of a smile. "Well, the paychecks are cold, but the coffee's always hot. You want breakfast to go with it? Eggs, bacon, toast, however you make it fastest." She nodded, scribbling. "You got it. I'm April if you need anything." "Mason?" "Welcome to Rust Creek, Mason." She poured him a mug, then hesitated, glancing down. "He okay under there?" As if on cue, a black nose emerged from the shadows under the table, golden eyes, scar over one brow. April's breath caught, but she didn't jump. She just shifted her weight, assessing. "Lord," she whispered, "he's big." "He's trained," Mason said. "Won't bother anyone." "He a cop dog? Military?" "Both," Mason answered, which was close enough to the truth. April held his gaze for a heartbeat, then nodded slowly. "Well, long as he don't bite nobody, I ain't gotta mop up. We're fine. I'll bring him some water." She walked away, weaving between tables with the weary grace of someone who'd been balancing plates and problems for years. Mason let his eyes sweep the room, not out of curiosity, but out of reflex. Booth, counter, cook window, bathroom hall, back exit. He cataloged, measured, filed away. His gaze had just reached the far corner when something snagged his attention like barbed wire. A wheelchair. Not a hospital wheelchair, but a smaller, customized one. Purple frame chipped from use, cartoon stickers half picked off the footrests. The girl sitting in it couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. Her hair was the color of summer wheat and hung in a plain braid over one shoulder. There was a white scar across her forehead, pale against her sunless skin. A thick blanket covered her legs, tucked in tight despite the warmth of the cafe. Her hands were folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. But it wasn't the chair that bothered Mason. It wasn't even the emptiness in her gaze. It was the angle of her shoulders and the way she held her jaw. Not slack like someone whose mind had gone far away, but tight, controlled, too controlled. Under the table, Shadow shifted. Mason felt the dog's ribs brush his shin as he moved. A quiet, rumbling exhale vibrated through the booth. "Easy," Mason muttered. Shadow ignored him. Instead, he inched forward until his muzzle was just at the table's edge, golden eyes locked on the girl in the purple chair. His ears pricked, but not in the alert posture that meant danger. This was different, focused, puzzled. April returned with a bowl of water, setting it discreetly under the table. "There you go, big guy," she said softly. Then, to Mason, "Food'll be up in a bit. You passing through for work?" "Just driving," he answered. "Needed coffee." "You picked the wrong town for optimism," she said, but her gaze drifted toward the corner, toward the wheelchair. "That your girl?" he asked. April's grip tightened on the coffee pot. A mixture of fierce love and deep, helpless fear flickered across her face, then smoothed away. "That's Lily," she said quietly. "My little hurricane, or she used to be." Her voice caught, then pushed on. "Car wreck last year. Doctor says she'll probably never walk again. Some spinal thing I can't even pronounce." Mason glanced at Lily again. The girl hadn't moved, not a twitch. "She come here every shift?" "Can't afford a sitter," April replied, tired apology in every syllable. "And she don't like being alone since—" She cut herself off. "I park her there. She listens to her stories, watches people. It's what we got." "Sorry," Mason said. He meant it. April nodded, swallowing back something sharp, then pasted on the bright waitress smile again. She moved away to refill an old man's cup. Mason went back to his food, but his brain didn't let it go. He'd seen real paralysis, field injuries, spinal cords severed by shrapnel, men who would never feel their legs again. This girl didn't look like those men. She looked like someone trying very, very hard not to move. Under the table, Shadow's nose twitched. The dog drank once, then stopped mid-lap. His nostrils flared, tracking something Mason couldn't smell. His head turned, not toward the kitchen, where bacon popped and coffee steamed. Not toward the door, where cold air slipped under the frame, toward Lily's table. A low growl started in Shadow's chest, more vibration than sound. It wasn't aggression, it was his "something's wrong" note, the same one he used to give Mason before an IED, before a hidden tripwire, before a man who smiled too easily pulled a hidden gun. "Shadow," Mason warned under his breath. The dog's tail thumped once against the bench, acknowledging the command but refusing to break his stare. His ears flicked as the cafe door opened again. A man in a steel blue suit walked in, the kind of crisp, expensive fabric that didn't belong in Rust Creek. He was in his 50s, salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, wire-rimmed glasses catching the weak light. His smile was polished the way showroom floors are polished, bright, designed to make you feel like everything was clean and safe. "Mornin', folks," he boomed, as if the whole cafe were there just for him. April's shoulders relaxed. "Morning, doctor. Hail." He crossed to the counter, setting down a sleek black medical bag. "Lily awake?" he asked. "In the corner," April said, pride and worry tangling together. She said she felt good today, but a shadow flickered behind Hale's eyes, there and gone. "We'll keep her that way," he said smoothly. "You know I'm not going to give up on her." Mason had never heard of him, but he knew the type. Small-town savior, polished, charming, too comfortable with people's gratitude. Hale took a small, amber bottle out of his bag. No label, just a strip of white tape with a handwritten date. He poured a thick, clear liquid into a plastic dosing cup as he walked toward the purple wheelchair. Shadow's growl deepened. "Quiet," Mason hissed. The dog's eyes stayed locked on the cup. His nostrils flared, then snapped shut. His ears flattened halfway. Recognition. Disgust. Warning. Mason recognized that look too. Shadow was trained to alert on certain chemicals. Explosives, nerve agents, some industrial solvents they'd run drills with overseas. He had that same look now, at a medicine cup. Hale knelt by Lily, his voice dropping to a soothing murmur. "Hey there, Lilybug," he said. "How's my bravest girl today?" "Nothing." "Lily?" Her eyes shifted, the tiniest fraction, to his face. Then they went flat again, like someone had pulled a curtain down from the inside. "Time for your dose," he said, tipping the cup toward her lips. "We want to keep those legs nice and relaxed so they can heal, remember?" Lily opened her mouth obediently. He poured. She swallowed. Mason watched, a slow burn starting in his chest. He'd dealt with medics, surgeons, field docs. None of them carried unmarked liquids around town and hand-dosed children in diners. Hale wiped Lily's chin with a napkin, smiled at her, then walked back toward the counter. Shadow's head followed the doctor's every step, pupils dark and wide, muscles tight under his coat. Mason made a decision he hadn't meant to make that day. He wasn't just passing through Rust Creek anymore. For the next 3 days, Mason came back to the Millside Cafe, always around the same time, always to the same booth, always with Shadow under the table like a dark, silent rumor. He told himself it was the eggs, or the quiet, or the way the fog lifted just enough around 10 a.m. to make the town look almost alive. But that wasn't it. He came back because every time he walked in, Shadow's entire body tuned itself to that purple wheelchair, and because the pattern was impossible to ignore. In the mornings, before the man in the steel blue suit arrived, Lily was different, subtle things at first. The way she tilted her head toward the jukebox when an old rock song played, lips moving slightly with words no one thought she remembered. The way her fingers toyed with the edge of the blanket, tapping out rhythms on her own knee. Once, when April leaned over to adjust, Lily's braid, a fork slipped off a tray and clattered on the floor. Lily's shoulders flinched. Her right hand jerked toward the sound. Her legs didn't move, but the muscles in her thighs twitched against the blanket. Mason saw, Shadow smelled. Then Hale would come, smile bright, voice warm, unmarked bottle in hand. He'd pour. Lily swallowed. Within minutes, her head would loll slightly. Her eyes would lose focus, sliding away from people and onto nowhere. Her fingers, previously restless, would go still. The tiny twitches in her blanket-smooth legs would fade as if someone were slowly turning down the volume on her body. By the time Hale left, patting April's shoulder and saying something about stability and supporting the healing process, Lily looked like the tragic picture everyone believed she was. "Doctor says the nerves fire wrong," April told Mason once, catching his gaze after an unusually heavy dose day. "He says if they spasm too much, they'll never knit right. This stuff keeps her calm." "It got a name?" Mason asked. "Some kind of compound he's building a study around," she said. "He says we're lucky, says most folks would never get access." Lucky. Mason thought of Shadow's hackles lifting at the smell, of Lily's bright morning eyes turning to soft, drugged glass. Lucky was not the word he would have used. That afternoon, he followed Hale without meaning to. Shadow didn't even need a command. When Hale left the cafe and walked down Main, Shadow's head whipped toward the door. His nose twitched. His body leaned forward. Mason tossed some bills on the table and stepped out into the weak daylight. Hale's silver sedan sat at the curb. The logo on the door was new and glossy, the letters sharp. Hale Rehabilitation and Neurocare Center. Rust Creek. Where healing begins. The building itself was at the edge of town, where brick gave way to cheap siding and empty lots. It was newer than anything else in Rust Creek, a 2-story structure of beige panels, mirrored windows, and a parking lot half full of cars that clearly didn't belong to locals, staff, Mason guessed, or visiting reps from whatever pharmaceutical company had funded that sign. He parked across the street, pretending to be more interested in the map app on his phone than the traffic patterns. Shadow wasn't pretending. The dog stared at the clinic doors, muscles bunched. "Talk to me, bud," Mason murmured. "What don't you like?" Shadow flicked his tongue over his nose. shook his head once as if to clear a scent, then whined. A high, keening sound Mason had heard only twice in all the years they'd served together. Once in Afghanistan, when they'd stumbled upon a cache of improperly stored nerve agent. Once in a training yard, when a mock explosive had detonated too close to unprotected recruits. And now, in a quiet coal town, outside a building with cartoon butterflies painted on its windows. Mason stared at the clinic. Hale walked out, laughing with a woman in scrubs, his hand light on her shoulder in that casual, too familiar way. He didn't look like a monster. Monsters rarely did. Mason could have driven away. It wasn't his town, not his kid, not his business. But Shadow pressed his chest against the glass, ears pinned, eyes burning holes in the doctor's back. Mason had spent years trusting that dog to find bombs buried under sand, men hiding in irrigation ditches, wires hidden in rubble. He wasn't about to stop trusting him now. The motel on the edge of Rust Creek smelled like bleach, cigarettes, and despair. Mason had stayed in worse. He set his battered laptop on the small table, Shadow flopping at his feet with a sigh that was all joint pain and exhaustion. Just for a while, Mason told him. We're not moving in. Shadow thumped his tail once, unconvinced. Mason pulled up a secure browser out of habit. Old training died harder than anything else. He searched. Victor Hale, MD, plus rehabilitation, PLO, West Virginia. Page after page of press releases and local news segments loaded. Hale in a white coat, arm around crying mothers. Hale cutting a ribbon in front of the clinic. Hale shaking hands with a state representative in front of a banner about rural outreach programs. He was everywhere. Reading between the headlines, the story was simple. Former big city neurologist returns to his hometown to give back. Open specialized rehab center in Rust Creek. Focus on pediatric cases. Kids with spinal injuries, neurological disorders, hard luck stories. State grants. Federal research funding. Pilot programs. The smiling doctor with the tragic kids was a goldmine of goodwill and taxpayer dollars. But underneath the press, buried in the fine print of medical journals and open access papers, Mason found something else. A series of small studies, all bearing Hale's name, somewhere in the author list. All about one thing. Pharmacologically induced hypomobility to protect healing tissues. Inducing stillness. Medicating movement away. Drugging bodies into quiet. Mason's fingers clenched around the mouse. He thought of Lily's twitching muscles before the dose. Her blank, heavy stillness after. He needed proof, not just a feeling. Not just a dog's growl in a veteran's gut. Proof meant chemistry. Chemistry meant someone who still had access to a lab. He scrolled through the contacts on a phone he should have destroyed 2 years ago and stopped at a name he hadn't used outside encrypted chats. Diaz. He hesitated only long enough to feel the familiar sting of guilt. Then he tapped call. The connection crackled, bounced through satellites to somewhere much cleaner and brighter than Rust Creek. Mason, a woman's voice said, do you have any idea what time it is? In D.C., early, he answered. You aging bureaucrats can handle it. Sonia Diaz snorted softly. Retired bureaucrat now. I told you. I consult. You play with dangerous chemicals and make senators nervous, he corrected. Still got lab access? Depends who's asking and how much trouble you're bringing. A pause. What's wrong? Mason glanced at Shadow. The dog was pretending to sleep, but his ears were angled toward the laptop. I need a compound analyzed, Mason said. No chain of custody, no official records. I'll send it through the usual channel. I just need to know if it's what this doctor says it is. What does he say it is? A muscle relaxant, Mason answered. For a kid in a wheelchair. And you don't believe him? I believe my dog, Mason said simply. Diaz sighed. You and that damn dog? Fine. You have 48 hours. Don't send anything that glows. I've got something better, Mason said. I've got a town that thinks poison is medicine. The next morning, Mason didn't just watch Hale dose Lily. He moved. As the doctor walked away, setting the empty unmarked dosing cup in the bus tub near the kitchen, Mason rose from his booth. Coffee to go, he told April, tossing some bills on the table. And a favor. She blinked. What kind of favor? Keep Hale busy for 30 seconds, he said quietly. Ask him about whatever grants he's chasing. He'll talk. Why? Because I need to throw away my trash, Mason lied. April looked confused, but there was something in his tone that made her nod. Maybe it was the way he carried himself. Maybe it was the dog who moved with him like a shadow that had chosen him, not the other way around. Either way, she stepped toward Hale with the coffee pot. Dr. Hale, she said brightly, you hear back about that big program you were talking about? For the kids? Hale's eyes lit up. Rust Creek Pediatric Mobility Initiative, he said. Could be huge for us. While he talked, Mason moved. Shadow's body slid with him, keeping low, keeping quiet. In one smooth motion, Mason reached into the tub, plucked the empty dosing cup out, and palmed it into his jacket pocket. Sorting trash. Nothing more. Shadow's nose brushed the pocket, then bumped it insistently. Got it, Mason muttered. He left without finishing his coffee. Back at the motel, he rinsed the thin residue from the cup into a small sterile vial he kept with his first aid kit. Old habits again. You learn to preserve what might matter. He labeled it with a date and a simple tag. L1. Then he packed it in a padded envelope and dropped it in the One Express mailbox in town, paying cash for a rush delivery to a post office Diaz used near D.C. On the little form where he could write a description, he scrawled 3 words, for pain management. If there was truth in that, Diaz would find it. If there was poison, she'd find that too. All Mason had to do now was wait. He was bad at waiting. He didn't wait far from Lily. By the 3rd day, April stopped asking why he kept showing up. She just poured his coffee the moment he walked in, letting the dark liquid fill the mug nearly to the brim, and said, "She sleeps better when you're around." "Because of me?" he asked, genuinely surprised. "Because of him," she said, nodding toward Shadow, who had begun to stop under Lily's table every time they passed, offering his presence like a quiet, living shield. Lily's eyes would flicker, her fingers would slide into Shadow's fur, and something in her posture, in the line of her jaw, would soften. Just a fraction. The 4th morning, April was late getting to the cafe. When she rushed in, hair damp, Lily in the wheelchair, she looked more shaken than tired. "Sorry, Frank," she called to the cook. The bus stalled again. Mason watched as she maneuvered Lily into the corner. He could see the strain in the way she lifted her daughter, the way her arms trembled just slightly as she slid the blanket into place. "Morning, Lily," he said quietly as Shadow crept closer. Lily's eyes moved, landing not on his face, but on the side of the booth where the dog's ear barely jutted out. She blinked. Twice. Then, very slowly, her hand slid off her blanket and down the side of the chair. Her fingers groped in the air for a second, then sank into fur. Shadow's tail thumped once against the floor. Mason's breath caught. "Hey, kiddo," he said. "You like him?" Her lips parted. For a moment, it looked like no sound would come out. Then, in a dry, rusty whisper, she said, "He's warm." April froze halfway to the counter, coffee pot in hand. The cafe went quiet, like everyone felt the shift in the air. "She talked," Frank muttered from behind the griddle. "Haven't heard her do that in weeks." April's eyes filled. Hope flashed, quick, terrified, electric. Then Hale walked in. The spell shattered. "Good morning," he called. "How's my favorite cafe today?" Lily's hand snapped back into her lap. Her spine straightened into that too-still pose. April wiped her eyes roughly, swallowed her tears, and pasted on a smile. "Dr. Hale," she said. "She had a good morning." "That's wonderful," he said. "Let's keep it that way." Shadow's growl was almost inaudible under the scrape of chairs and clink of dishes. But Mason heard it. He watched Hale go through the same ritual. Bag, bottle, dosing cup, murmured words, obedient swallow. He watched the life fade from Lily's posture, the connection to the dog loosen, the warmth drain from her eyes. He watched April watch her child, desperate not to see what she was seeing. Mason made another decision. He wasn't waiting for lab results to act. The call came that night anyway. Diaz didn't bother with hello. "What the hell are you sitting in, Cole?" she snapped. Mason sat up on the motel bed, Shadow, lifting his head, eyes sharp. "That bad?" he asked. What you sent me, she said tightly, is not a standard muscle relaxant. It's a cocktail. There's a base of baclofen, sure, clinical, legal, but it's jacked up with 2 experimental agents I've only seen in internal pharma documents. English Sonia. Fine. Papers rustled on her end. At that dose, that mix does 3 things. First, it absolutely wipes out voluntary muscle control from the waist down. We're talking dead weight. If a kid had partial spinal damage and any hope of regaining function, this would smother it. Mason's jaw clenched. Second, she went on, it slows reflex response to almost nothing. You know the little hammer doctors tap your knee with? This turns that into a whisper. Pull back from pain, delayed, or gone. And third, she hesitated. What? It messes with the frontal lobe, she said quietly. Just enough to dull executive function, focus, motivation, emotion. A kid on this stuff, long term, would look like a tragic case, Mason finished for her. Like a vegetable in a chair someone could build a whole story around. Exactly, her voice softened. Where did you find this? In a cup, he said, watching Shadow's ears flatten. In a little girl's mouth. Cole? Can you tie it to anything? He pressed. Any trials? Any approvals? Officially, no. Unofficially? Diaz sighed. 2 years ago, a company out of Boston filed for a clinical trial authorization for a temporary hypomobility agent for post-surgical kids. FDA kicked it back. Too risky. The lead researcher on that file? Let me guess. Victor Hale, she said. Mason stared at the water-stained motel ceiling. He didn't take no for an answer, Diaz continued. Looks like he found his own trial pool. Poor, rural, desperate, no second opinions. If this goes public, it will, Mason said. Cole, I'm not asking for permission, he cut in, but I am asking for backup. You have any friends left in the bureau? Diaz exhaled slowly. He could practically see her rubbing the bridge of her nose. Send me everything, she said. Notes, timestamps, observations. I'll push it to someone who still owes me favors. But listen to me, Mason. Do not confront this man alone. If he's willing to do this to kids, he's desperate enough to do worse. Mason's gaze dropped to Shadow. Good thing I'm not alone, he said. The hardest part wasn't planning a confrontation. Mason had done that his whole adult life. The hardest part was knocking on April's door. Her house sat 3 streets behind the main drag, wedged between a collapsed trailer and a church whose steeple leaned like a broken finger. The porch sagged, the windows fogged from the inside, leaking pale yellow light onto the cracked steps. Shadow sniffed the air, then huffed, not in warning, but in recognition. Lily lived here. Her scent, mixed with blankets and spill stains and cheap soap, hung around the doorway. Mason knocked. Inside, something cursed, something dropped, and then April pulled the door open a crack, hair damp from a shower, t-shirt thrown on inside out. Mason, she blurted, is everything all right? Did something happen to Lily at the cafe? She okay? He asked, heart tightening. April stepped back, opening the door all the way. Lily was on the couch, blanket over her legs, cartoon on the TV. Her eyes were clearer than he'd ever seen them inside the cafe. Her fingers twisted the fringe of the blanket. Shadow's tail swished softly. Lily's head turned toward the sound, and a small, involuntary smile tugged at her mouth. She's fine, April said, still catching her breath. Why are you here? Mason stepped inside, water dripping off his jacket onto the scarred hardwood. Shadow followed, positioning himself between the couch and the door. I need to talk to you, Mason said. About Hale, about what he's giving her. April's face shuddered instantly. No, she said, voice sharp. Absolutely not. I know what you're thinking, and I swear, if you come into my house and talk bad about the only man He's poisoning her, April, Mason said quietly. The words hung in the room like a crack of lightning. Lily's eyes flicked from the TV to his face. April laughed once, a sound full of splintered nerves. You don't know what you're talking about. You've been here, what, a week? You think you can just stroll in and tell me? I sent a sample of those drops to a toxicologist I trust with my life, Mason cut in. They're not just relaxing her muscles, they're suppressing them, killing reflexes, clouding her mind. Any chance her body has to remember how to move, he's smothering it. On purpose. You're wrong, April whispered. "You have to be wrong." Shadow shifted, moving closer to the couch. One big paw landed on the blanket covering Lily's calf. Her leg jerked, not much, maybe half an inch. But it jerked. Mason nodded toward it. "Paralyzed legs don't do that," he said. April's gaze snapped to her daughter's blanketed knees. Her breath hitched. "It's just a nerve spasm," she stammered. "Dr. Hale said—" "I read his papers," Mason said. "I talked to a woman who used to review trial data like his for a living. The FDA told him he couldn't test that drug on kids, so he came home and found another way." "No," April repeated, but her voice was thinner now. "He doesn't even charge me. He drives out here after hours. He holds her hand when she cries. That's how men like him work," Mason said. "They make you feel like you owe them, like questioning them is betrayal. But I've watched your daughter before he doses her, and after. You've watched her too. Tell me you haven't seen the difference." April's eyes filled, denial and dawning horror wrestling in them. Lily looked between them, small brows furrowing. "Mom," she said, voice barely above the TV. "Am I in trouble?" The sound of her daughter's voice seemed to crack whatever dam April had built inside. Tears spilled over. "No, baby," she choked. "No, you're not." She sank into the chair opposite the couch, shoulders shaking. "If you're wrong," she said, looking at Mason through tears. "If we stop the medicine and she hurts, if she loses what little she has—" "If I'm wrong," Mason said, "I'll load you both in my truck and drive straight to the nearest hospital. You don't ever have to see me again. But if I'm right—" He glanced at Lily. The girl's eyes were clearer now, focused, tracking. April followed his gaze. Her breath caught. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Skip one dose," Mason said. "Just one, tomorrow morning. Let her body wake up without it. We'll stay. We'll be here, just in case. Give her 12 hours. See what happens." April stared at him, at the scars on his hands, at the military posture he couldn't quite relax out of, at the dog who watched her child like a guardian. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You don't know us. You could drive away tonight and never think of us again." Mason thought of all the times he'd driven away from places he wished he'd stayed. Men he couldn't save. Kids who stared at convoys with bone-deep fear. He thought of how Shadow had pressed his nose to the medicine cup. How the dog had whined. "Because I've spent my life fighting men who hurt people they think no one will miss," he said. "And I'm tired of leaving them behind." April's shoulders slumped. She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand and nodded once. "One dose," she whispered. Shadow lay down at the foot of the couch, head on his paws, eyes never leaving Lily. The war had changed locations. It was here now, in a small, sagging house with peeling paint and a girl in a purple wheelchair. And Mason wasn't going anywhere. The next morning felt like waiting for an explosion. April didn't sleep. She sat in a chair by Lily's bed, the amber bottle heavy in her pocket like a stone. Morning light crept through the thin curtains, painting stripes across the faded quilt. Every few minutes she'd pull the bottle out, thumb the cap, then shove it back. At 8, Lily stirred. At 8:02, she didn't scream. On most days by this time, Hale would already be pulling into the driveway, talking about preemptive pain management. Today, there was only the distant sound of a truck on the highway and the closer whisper of Shadow's breath outside the half-open bedroom door. "Mama?" Lily's voice was small, confused. April's heart hammered. "I'm here, baby," she said. Lily blinked, eyes adjusting to the light. Not squinting in pain, not squeezed shut, just waking. "How do you feel?" April asked, terrified of the answer. Lily frowned, considering. "Floaty," she said, "but not heavy." Her gaze drifted over April's shoulder, a small, natural movement April hadn't seen in months. Her eyes followed the dust motes in the sunbeam. Then Lily did something she hadn't done since the crash. She tried to sit up on her own. Her arms trembled, but they worked. Her body fought its way upright. The blanket slipped. April saw her daughter's bare feet for the first time in weeks, pale, toes curled slightly. "Can you move them?" April whispered, voice shaking. I don't know," Lily said, fear creeping in. "Dr. Hale says I shouldn't try. It'll make it worse." "Just try," April said. "Please." Lily stared at her toes as if they belonged to someone else. Her forehead puckered with effort. The big toe on her right foot twitched. April made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Again," she choked. "Do it again." Lily's jaw clenched. The toe twitched. Then the whole foot jerked. Tiny, imperfect, but undeniably under her control. Shadow barked once from the hall. A sharp, startled burst of sound, then rushed in, nails skidding on the wood. He shoved his nose against Lily's ankle. Her leg pulled away. Not a spasm. A reflex. A human, living, unpoisoned reflex. "Mama," Lily whispered, eyes wide with terror and hope. "What's happening? Did my legs wake up?" April grabbed her daughter's face in both hands, pressing kisses to her cheeks, her forehead, her hair. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, baby, they did. They were never asleep. They were just... Her voice broke. She couldn't say the word. Poisoned. Mason stood in the doorway, fist pressed against the frame, throat tight. He'd seen healing before, bodies surprising everyone, brains clawing back from the edge. But this was different. This wasn't an act of God or luck or good surgery. This was what had been there all along, buried under chemicals and lies. "We're done being his experiment," he said quietly. April looked up, tears streaking her face, eyes full of something new. Not just gratitude, not just sorrow. Rage. "What do we do?" she asked. "We keep her off the drug," Mason said. "We document everything. Diaz is already feeding what she is to federal agents, but men like Hale don't give up control easy." "How long do we have?" Mason thought of the appointment book he'd glimpsed on the clinic receptionist's desk. Weekly check-ins, daily calls, dependents. "He'll notice today," Mason said, "and when his test subject doesn't show up to the lab, he'll come looking." He glanced at Shadow. The dog stared back, as if to say, "Let him." "We'll be ready," Mason said. He spent the afternoon turning the sagging house into something else entirely. April watched, dazed, as he walked through each room, eyes half closed, as if he were listening to the walls. "This door sticks," he muttered, testing hinges. "Good, slows them down." He moved a bookshelf 2 inches to the left to block a line of sight from the hallway, turned a mirror so it threw the reflection of the front porch into the living room from a safer angle. He taped down rugs, checked window locks, and jammed a rickety chair under the back doorknob in just the right way that it would buy them an extra 3 seconds if someone tried to force it. Shadow trailed him, absorbing every new scent, every changed inch of floor. Mason loaded a pistol at the kitchen table, the weapon disappearing into the small of his back with the practiced smoothness of someone who'd done this in sand-blasted safe houses and cramped city apartments. "You planning on shooting him?" April asked, voice small. "I'm planning on keeping you and your daughter alive," Mason said. "Everything else is negotiable." "And the police?" Mason gave a humorless laugh. "Diaz's people are working on that. But feds don't move fast unless there's a news camera involved. We'll call 911 when he makes his move. Until then, we hold." April swallowed. "This is insane." "This is survival," Mason countered. By dusk, the house was dim and quiet. April tucked Lily into her bedroom at the back, Shadow curling up beside the bed like a furry barricade. "You okay?" Mason asked the girl softly. She nodded, biting her lip. "My legs feel weird," she admitted. "Like they're asleep and waking up at the same time." "That's good," Mason said. "Means they're remembering. You just keep wiggling those toes. Shadow's gonna stay right here with you. He won't let anyone in that door who isn't me or your mom. Got it?" Lily's hand disappeared into the thick fur at Shadow's neck. "Got it," she whispered. Mason closed the door, hearing the subtle click of teeth as Shadow settled his jaws next to the crack at the bottom. Not a threat, but a promise. He took position in the living room, lights off, front door in view. April sat on the couch, fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "You sure about this?" she whispered. "No," Mason answered honestly. "But I'm sure about him." He nodded toward the bedroom, where Shadow lay unseen but utterly present. Sometimes you measured safety not in locks or guns, but in the weight of a dog between danger and what you loved. They didn't have to wait long. An engine's low rumble floated up the street sometime after full dark. Not a rusted pickup, not a hatchback with one headlight out. This sound was smoother, more expensive, Headlights swept past the front windows, then cut. 3 car doors opened. Mason's body relaxed in the way it only did before violence, breath slowing, heart rate dropping. The world sharpened. He saw the front door handle tremble. Once, twice, then a fist pounded on the wood. "April?" Hale's voice, muffled, sharp. "It's Dr. Hale. We need to talk." April looked at Mason, panic flaring. "Don't answer," he said quietly. "Let him think you're not home." Another pound, louder. "April!" Hale's tone changed. Less concern, more command. "You missed Lily's appointment. That's not acceptable. Her treatment is time-sensitive. You know that." He waited. No answer. The third knock was a kick. The frame shuddered. From the bedroom, shadow erupted. A single deep bark that shook dust from the ceiling. Mason moved to the edge of the living room, flattening himself behind the wall where he could see the door without being seen. "Last chance!" Hale shouted. "I will call the sheriff. You are neglecting your daughter's care." "You are not calling anyone," a second voice muttered. Lower, rougher, hired muscle. "We got this." The next kick split the cheap wood around the latch. The knob tore free. The door swung inward with a crack. Victor Hale stepped into the dim living room, flanked by 2 men. He didn't look like the smiling man from the news clips now. His tie was askew. Sweat dampened his hairline. His eyes darted, frantic, greedy. "April?" he called, stepping further inside. "You're making a very serious mistake. You don't understand what you're doing to Lily's recovery by skipping even one." "Funny thing about recovery," Mason said calmly, stepping out of the shadows. "Sometimes it starts the moment you stop being poisoned." Hale jerked, spinning toward the voice. The 2 men on either side of him moved on instinct, one reaching under his jacket, the other bringing up a crowbar like he'd been born with it in his hand. Mason's reply was faster than thought, years of training firing in his muscles before his brain finished weighing options. He closed the distance in 3 long steps, catching the man with the crowbar by the wrist, twisting. The metal clanged to the floor. A knee to the gut folded the man. An elbow to the back of the neck sent him crashing into the coffee table, splintering cheap particle board. The second man got his gun half drawn before Mason slammed his forearm into the man's shoulder, pinning the arm to the wall. The gun went off, the muffled crack deafening in the small room, the bullet chewing into the ceiling harmlessly. Mason drove his fist into the man's jaw. Once, twice. The man sagged, gun slipping from limp fingers. Hale stumbled backward, eyes wide. "You have no idea who you're interfering with," he hissed. "Do you think you, some drifter with a dog, can stand against what I've built?" "I've stood against worse," Mason said. "You drug kids in diners. You're not as special as you think." Hale's hand darted to his pocket and came out with a small silver syringe. "If you won't bring her to me, I'll take the treatment to her," he snarled. "Get out of my way." He lunged toward the hallway. Shadow hit the bedroom door on the other side of that hall like a battering ram, snarling, a sound old and wild and full of teeth. Hale froze, syringe clutched tight. "That's her room," Mason said quietly. "He's between you and her. Feel like trying him?" For the first time, real fear crept into Hale's eyes. Not the fear of getting caught, the fear of being ripped apart by something that understood exactly who the enemy was. "You're unhinged," he spat. "All of you. I tried to help this town. I brought jobs, resources." "You brought a lab," Mason said, "and you found kids whose parents were desperate enough to sign whatever you put in front of them. You think nobody noticed all the car accidents and mysterious illnesses that just happened to land in your program? You can't prove—" "Actually," a third voice said from the doorway, "we can." Hale spun toward it. A woman in an FBI windbreaker stood on the porch, gun trained on him, with the steadiness of someone who'd been doing this long enough to be bored by it. Flashing red and blue lights painted the street behind her. "Victor Hale," she said crisply. "You're under arrest for fraud, unauthorized human experimentation, and about 18 other federal charges my team will be thrilled to read off to you later. Hands where I can see them." Hale's knees buckled. The syringe slipped from his fingers, clattering across the floor. "How?" he stammered. "You might want to pick better enemies," the agent said. "Some of them have my number." Mason exhaled slowly. Diaz had come through. Agents swarmed in, cuffing the groaning men on the floor, securing Hale, bagging the syringe. Cameras flashed outside, neighbors peeking from behind curtains drawn back with nervous, curious fingers. April stepped out of the hallway, Lily clinging to her, barefoot, toes curling into the wood. "You okay?" Mason asked her. April's eyes were wide, but her jaw was set. "I'm done being afraid of him," she said. Hale twisted in his cuffs, spotting Lily. For a heartbeat, some twisted version of concern flared. "Lily," he said, "honey, you have to tell them. Tell them how much better you were." Lily's fingers tightened in Shadow's fur. She stared at Hale, lips trembling. Then, very slowly, she took a step forward. Just one. Unexpected, shaky, imperfect. But a step. Shadow moved with her, shoulder bumping her hip, ready to catch her if she fell. I don't need your medicine," she said, voice wavering but clear. "I can feel my legs again." Hale's face crumpled, not with sorrow, with fury at losing control over his favorite subject. "Get him out of here," the agent said. As they dragged Hale past, Shadow let out one low warning growl. The doctor flinched away from the dog more than he had from the handcuffs. Sometimes justice looked like a courtroom and a sentence. Sometimes it started with a child taking one step, in front of the man who swore she never would. 3 months later, Rust Creek didn't look any richer. The mills still loomed, the streets still cracked. The motel still smelled like too much bleach poured over too many sins. But the park on the hill above town sounded different. Kids' laughter has a way of changing the air itself. The town's annual fall festival had always been a modest affair. Some hay bales, a pumpkin carving contest, a homemade pie auction. This year, there were more wheelchairs on the grass than tractors, more physical therapists than farmers. In the center of the worn soccer field, beneath banners that read Rust Creek Mobility Day, hastily printed but proud, a small cluster of kids played a slow, messy game of tag. Walkers and braces and wheelchairs, all part of the dance. Lily was in the middle of them. She stood. Not perfectly, not without help. Metal braces hugged her calves, plastic splints peeked over her sneakers, and a colorful walker framed her like training wheels. But her feet moved, one in front of the other. Shadow walked at her side, wearing a bright vest that read, "Assistance Dog" in block letters. He matched her pace flawlessly, adjusting every step to hers, taken for granted grace turning into careful, deliberate partnership. "Watch this!" Lily shouted, cheeks flushed. She let go of the walker with one hand and tossed a beanbag toward a bucket. It missed, bouncing off the rim. Shadow jumped after it, caught it in midair, and dropped it in the bucket with a smug flick of his tail. The kids cheered like he'd just scored the winning point in a championship game. April stood at the edge of the field, a styrofoam cup of cider forgotten in her hand. "I still don't believe it," she murmured. Mason, beside her, watched Lily try to pivot with the walker, almost stumble, then catch herself with Shadow's help. "You better," he said. "She's been telling every other kid here she's going to race them by Christmas." "She might," April said, a crooked smile tugging at her lips. "Stubbornness runs in the family." Mason huffed a quiet laugh. Reports had come in over the last few weeks like shrapnel from a detonated secret. Families from 3 counties over. Kids who'd been told they would never talk, never walk, never think clearly. All miracle candidates for Hale's programs. All showing changes as soon as the drugs stopped. There would be trials, senators being shamed on TV, lawsuits and settlements and hearings with too many microphones. Mason wasn't interested in the spectacle. He'd done his part. Now he was more interested in the way Lily's feet left little divots in the soft field. "You know you could leave, right?" April said quietly. "You did. All of this. You don't owe us anything." Mason watched Shadow stop mid-stride so Lily could scratch behind his ear, then start walking again exactly at her speed. He thought of the empty apartment he'd given up in the city, the boxes he'd never unpacked, the silence that waited for him there. "I've been leaving places my whole life," he said. "Figured it was time to see what happens if I stay." April looked up at him, eyes bright, face lined by years, but softened now by something gentler than fear. "What will you do?" she asked. "Diaz has a friend at the VA clinic in Charleston," he said. "They want someone to help train support dogs for vets. Could run a satellite program up here. Plenty of folks in Rust Creek who'd qualify." He nodded toward Lily and her cluster of determined, wobbly friends. And apparently there's a waiting list for one very particular dog and kid therapy demo team. April laughed, real and full. They're not wrong. On the field, Lily turned toward them, waving both arms. "Mom, Mason," she shouted. "Watch!" She let go of the walker with both hands. For a heartbeat, she balanced. Shadow leaned in, shoulder steady against her hip. She took one unassisted step. It wasn't far. It wasn't elegant. But she did it. When she wobbled, Shadow adjusted, catching her weight, guiding her back to the walker. "That's my girl," April whispered, voice breaking. Mason's chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with scars. Shadow caught his eye across the distance, tongue lolling, chest heaving with exertion and joy. For years, that dog had pulled him out of ambushes, warned him about hidden bombs, dragged him toward wounded men. Now, he was helping a little girl steal inches of ground from a past that tried to pin her down. Different war, same soldier, same loyalty. Mason lifted 2 fingers to his brow in a tiny, private salute. Shadow's tail wagged like he understood every word Mason hadn't said. Some battles ended with a bang. Others ended with a child's shaky, laughing breath, and a dog pressed against her side under a cloudy West Virginia sky. Mason had seen enough war to know which ending he wanted to fight for now.